Toxic people don't look for strength. They look for access. Access to your reactions, access to your guilt, access to the parts of you that still explain, justify, overgive, and doubt yourself. That is the secret no one tells you. They are not drawn to you because you are kind. They are drawn to you because you are available in the wrong way, available to be pulled into drama, available to be manipulated by emotion, available to abandon your center to keep the peace. And the moment that availability disappears, something fascinating happens. They don't argue, they don't confront, they don't explain, they drift away. Because toxic people are not hunters of truth, they are hunters of leverage. The secret that makes them avoid you is not confidence, it is not dominance, it is not aggression, it is inner neutrality. Neutrality is terrifying to someone who feeds on reaction. When you no longer react the way they expect, they lose orientation. When you don't rush to defend yourself, they lose control. When you don't explain your boundaries, they lose entry points. Carl Jung understood this at a depth most never reach. He knew that people project their shadow onto others to avoid facing it themselves. Toxic people don't want resolution, they want mirrors they can distort. And when you stop reflecting back what they need, confusion, guilt, emotional charge, they look elsewhere. Not because you fought them, but because you became opaque. This is syphoria reversed. Instead of inner discomfort from self-betrayal, you feel an unfamiliar calm from self-alignment. You stop over-explaining. You stop oversharing. You stop giving emotional commentary on every interaction. You become contained. Containment is the true boundary. Not what you say, but what you no longer leak. Toxic people rely on leaks. They rely on your need to be understood, your need to be liked, your need to smooth things over. When those needs dissolve, so does their power. The first shift is mindset. You stop believing that being accessible makes you good. You realize that constant accessibility makes you predictable, and predictability is exploitable. Belief changes next. You understand that you don't owe everyone emotional access. You don't owe explanations for your choices. You don't owe energy to people who drain it. Clarity sharpens. You see that toxic dynamics thrive on blurred lines, on unclear boundaries, on mixed signals. So you simplify. Your yes becomes clean. Your no becomes quiet. Your silence becomes intentional. Vision deepens. You begin to see yourself as someone who does not need to manage other people's feelings to feel safe. Purpose stabilizes. It's no longer about being perceived as good. It's about being internally aligned. Discipline changes form. You discipline your reactions, not your emotions. You feel everything, but you don't perform it. Action becomes minimal, but precise. You respond, not react. You state, not justify. You disengage, not argue. This is when toxic people feel something unsettling around you. They can't get traction. Their comments don't land. Their guilt doesn't stick. Their provocations dissolve into nothing. Because neutrality starves manipulation. Gratitude emerges in an unexpected way. You're grateful for your energy staying with you, for your peace no longer being negotiable, for your nervous system finally resting. Adaptability strengthens. You don't need to change who you are for different people. You stay the same, grounded, calm, consistent. Resilience forms. You tolerate being misunderstood without correcting it. You tolerate disapproval without collapsing. You tolerate silence without filling it. Learning integrates. You realize this truth. Toxic people don't leave because you set boundaries. They leave because boundaries reveal who they are. And they don't like mirrors that don't bend. The secret is not to harden yourself. Hardness invites conflict. The secret is to detach emotionally without disconnecting morally. You remain respectful. You remain calm. You remain unmoved. That combination is unbearable to someone who thrives on chaos. They test you once, maybe twice, and when they realize there's no reaction to harvest, they disappear, not angrily, not dramatically, quietly. They find someone else who still confuses empathy with access. And you don't feel victorious. You feel clear. Clear because your life no longer includes people who require you to shrink, explain, or perform emotional labor for free. You didn't become colder. You became centered. And centered people are invisible to toxicity because toxicity needs friction. It needs resistance. It needs guilt. It needs emotional hooks. And you remove them all not by fighting, but by mastering yourself. That is the secret. You don't repel toxic people by confronting them. You repel them by becoming someone they cannot use. And once that happens, something even better follows. Your relationships simplify. Your energy stabilizes. Your peace deepens. You no longer attract chaos because chaos can't find purchase. You've mastered the one thing toxic people fear most, someone who is whole. And wholeness does not negotiate its boundaries. It simply lives within them, quietly, powerfully, and without apology. And when you live from that wholeness, something subtle but irreversible changes in how the world approaches you. You stop being readable to people who seek control, not mysterious, not distant, unreadable, because your emotional responses are no longer automatic. Your energy no longer spills outward. Your presence no longer invites intrusion. Toxic people survive by predicting you. They learn which words trigger guilt, which tones make you explain, which silences make you panic. But now there is nothing to predict. You don't rush to clarify. You don't rush to defend. You don't rush to fix discomfort that isn't yours. And that stillness unsettles them, because manipulation requires movement. It requires you to lean in, to reach out, to react. When you don't, their strategies collapse. This is where most people misunderstand power. They think power is loud. They think power is assertive. They think power confronts. But true power is unavailable to exploitation. It doesn't argue. It doesn't prove. It doesn't perform. It simply does not engage where engagement would cost integrity. You begin to notice how often in the past you tried to be fair with people who were never acting in good faith. How often you extended understanding to those who used it as leverage. How often you mistook emotional labor for love. How often you stayed in conversations that eroded you just to avoid being misunderstood. That era ends here, not with bitterness, with clarity. You understand now that not every dynamic is meant to be healed. Some are meant to be outgrown. Toxic people don't want resolution. They want access. And when access is gone, the relationship ends not because you rejected them, but because there is nothing left for them to extract. This is why you don't need to announce boundaries. Announcements invite negotiation. You live them. You respond less. You share less. You explain nothing. Your energy stays with you. And because your energy stays with you, your nervous system calms. You are no longer bracing for emotional ambush, no longer anticipating manipulation, no longer scanning conversations for hidden meaning. Peace returns not because people changed, but because you did. This peace makes you less interesting to toxic people and more magnetic to healthy ones, because healthy people don't seek access to control you. They seek resonance. They feel grounded around you because you are grounded in yourself. They don't test your boundaries because they sense them. This is the paradox. When you stop trying to manage people, the right ones manage themselves around you. You no longer attract chaos because chaos cannot feed on neutrality. You no longer attract drama because drama cannot survive without reaction. You no longer attract manipulation because manipulation requires openings and you no longer leave them. And this does not make you cold. It makes you clear, clear in your yes, clear in your no, clear in your silence. Silence becomes one of your greatest tools. Not passive silence, intentional silence. The silence that refuses to fill space just to relieve tension. The silence that allows other people to reveal themselves. The silence that doesn't rescue others from the consequences of their behavior. Toxic people hate this silence because in it they hear themselves and they don't like what they hear, so they leave. They look for someone louder, someone more reactive, someone more available. And you let them go, not with relief, not with resentment, with neutrality. Because neutrality is the final boundary. It says, you cannot enter here, not because I hate you, but because I am whole. And wholeness has no gaps to exploit. This is the mastery, not mastering others, mastering yourself. Once you do, toxic people don't need to be confronted, exposed, or defeated. They dissolve out of your life, quietly, naturally, inevitably, because you have mastered the secret they cannot survive. You are no longer a source of supply. You are a source of presence, and presence belongs only to you. And when you become a source of presence instead of supply, something else happens that few people ever talk about. You stop needing distance to feel safe. You don't have to cut people off dramatically. You don't have to disappear. You don't have to explain why you've changed. Your internal shift does the work for you. Because toxic people don't leave when you say no. They leave when their influence stops working. When guilt no longer bends you. When provocation no longer moves you. When emotional chaos no longer pulls you out of center. This is why neutrality is so powerful. It is not indifference. It is non-attachment to manipulation. You can care without rescuing. You can listen without absorbing. You can be present without being penetrated. That distinction changes everything. Before, empathy was your weakness because it came without boundaries. Now, empathy is strength because it is grounded. You no longer confuse compassion with compliance. And toxic people feel that immediately. They feel it in how you don't rush, in how you don't over-explain, in how your tone stays level no matter what they throw at you. They try subtle things first. A passive comment, a guilt-inducing story, a test to see if you'll engage. And when nothing happens, when there's no emotional reward, they escalate. This is important to understand. Escalation is not power. Escalation is panic. It means the old strategy isn't working. And this is where most people slip. They mistake escalation for danger and re-engage to restore calm. You don't. You stay neutral. You don't match intensity. You don't correct the narrative. You don't defend your character. You let reality speak. And reality always exposes manipulation when no one interferes. This is why toxic people eventually label you as cold, changed, or distant. That label is not an insult. It is a confession. It means they no longer have access to the version of you that served them. And you don't correct that label either. Because explaining yourself is another form of access. You've learned something critical now. Your energy does not need to be understood to be protected. You don't owe clarity to people who misuse it. This is the point where your self-respect becomes nonverbal. You don't announce standards. You embody them, and embodiment is impossible to argue with. Your nervous system is calm. Your responses are measured. Your availability is selective. You become consistent. And consistency is unbearable to toxic people. They thrive on unpredictability, on emotional volatility, on keeping you off balance. When you remain the same grounded, neutral, self-contained, they lose footing. They can't hook into you. They can't destabilize you. They can't control the emotional temperature anymore. So they exit, sometimes quietly, sometimes resentfully, sometimes suddenly, but always for the same reason. There is nothing left to extract. And what remains after they're gone is something people rarely expect. Space, not emptiness. Space for relationships that don't drain you. Space for conversations that don't require armor. Space for silence that feels safe instead of tense. You begin to feel how much energy you were leaking just by staying reactive. Now that energy returns, you feel clearer in your thinking, stronger in your decisions, more grounded in your body. This is why mastering this secret doesn't just repel toxic people, it upgrades your entire life. Because when your internal state is no longer open to manipulation, everything around you reorganizes. Your standards rise without force. Your relationships simplify without drama. Your peace becomes stable instead of fragile. And all of this happened without confrontation, without lectures, without ultimatums, without emotional warfare. You didn't harden. You centered. And centered people don't attract toxicity. They repel it naturally, like still water refusing to ripple for thrown stones. This is the power you now carry. Quiet, non-reactive, unmovable. And toxic people know better than to stay where they can't feed. So they leave every time. And when they leave, the silence they leave behind does not feel empty. It feels clean. Clean because nothing is pulling at you anymore. Clean because your energy is no longer being siphoned into endless emotional loops. Clean because your inner world is finally your own. You begin to notice how much of your life was once shaped around anticipation, anticipating reactions, anticipating conflict, anticipating the need to explain or defend. That anticipation disappears. And without it, your mind becomes sharper. You think more clearly because you are no longer thinking around people. You decide faster because you are no longer factoring in manipulation. You rest deeper because your nervous system is no longer on alert. This is what happens when neutrality becomes embodied. You stop performing emotional labor unconsciously. You stop managing other people's inner chaos. You stop carrying responsibility that was never yours. And something subtle happens to your identity. You no longer see yourself as the strong one, the understanding one, or the one who can handle it. Those identities were born from tolerance, not power. Now, you see yourself as sovereign, sovereign over your time, sovereign over your attention, sovereign over your emotional access. Sovereignty doesn't need validation. It doesn't seek agreement. It doesn't explain its presence. It simply exists. This is why toxic people don't challenge you directly anymore. They sense something they can't move. They sense that pushing will not produce collapse. They sense that provoking will not produce reaction. They sense that guilt will not produce compliance. And manipulation without compliance is pointless. So they withdraw, not because you rejected them, but because you no longer invite them energetically. Your boundaries are no longer defensive. They are structural, built into how you speak, built into how you pause, built into how you disengage without hostility. This is the level most people never reach. They think boundaries are something you do, but boundaries are something you are. When your internal state is regulated, when your self-worth is no longer negotiated externally, when your emotions are felt but not leaked, boundaries form automatically. You don't have to remember them. They remember themselves, and from this place, life simplifies. You spend less time explaining and more time living, less time reacting and more time choosing, less time managing relationships and more time inhabiting your own presence. You become selective not out of fear, but out of clarity. Clarity about what costs you energy. Clarity about what nourishes you. Clarity about what you no longer tolerate, not because it's evil, but because it's misaligned. Toxic people thrive in misalignment. They need blurred edges. They need emotional fog. They need people who second guess themselves. You are no longer any of those things. And the most important shift of all happens quietly, without ceremony. You stop asking why certain people keep entering your life. Because they stop entering, your internal world has changed frequency. Not higher in a dramatic sense. Lower, steadier, grounded, and chaos cannot survive in steadiness. Drama cannot root itself in calm. Manipulation cannot anchor itself in self-trust. Toxicity cannot exist where reaction is absent. This is not something you maintain through effort. It maintains itself because it is who you are now. You mastered the secret, not by learning how to deal with toxic people, but by becoming someone who no longer provides what toxicity needs. You didn't harden your heart. You didn't close yourself off. You didn't become cold. You became whole. And wholeness is the one environment toxic people cannot survive in. So they avoid you instinctively, naturally, completely. And what remains is not isolation. It is peace that doesn't need defending, presence that doesn't need permission, a life that finally feels like it belongs to you. And this is where it settles not as a strategy, not as a technique, but as a way of being you will never unlearn. You are no longer trying to protect yourself from toxic people. You are simply no longer available to them, available to be pulled out of center, available to be guilted into explanations, available to sacrifice your peace to preserve connection. That availability is gone. And in its place stands something unshakable, self-possession. You move through conversations without bracing. You listen without absorbing. You disengage without hostility. Nothing about you needs to harden to do this. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. Clear about where your responsibility ends. Clear about what energy is yours to carry. Clear about the cost of giving access to people who misuse it. Toxic people sense this immediately. They don't argue with it. They don't challenge it. They don't try to change it. They avoid it because there's nothing to extract from someone who is whole. No reaction to feed on. No guilt to manipulate. No chaos to stir. You have become internally complete. And completion is the one thing toxicity cannot penetrate. So you move forward now without needing defenses, without rehearsing responses, without explaining your boundaries. Your presence speaks for you. Quiet, grounded, unavailable to misuse. And from this place, your life simplifies. The noise fades. The tension dissolves. The right people remain. Not because you filtered harder, but because you became someone who no longer attracts distortion. You mastered the secret. Not by learning how to deal with toxic people, but by mastering yourself. And once that happens, nothing toxic can stay.